Dr. Peterson, thank you so much for joining us all here. We're really excited to see you. This may be quite an annoying question since you've written a book that talks about 12 rules for life. But just for those in our audience who may not have heard your lectures or watched you on YouTube or read the book, is there a way you can capture the essence of your argument? Is there perhaps one rule above all others or some core argument that you could use to explain
There's probably two, I would say.
Okay.
One of the rules is do what is meaningful, not what is expedient. And that's sort of twinned with tell the truth or at least don't lie.
Right.
And I'd like to concentrate mostly on the rule that describes the necessity of meaning. And I've spent a lot of time talking to my public audiences about this as well as outlining it in the book. The theme of the book is in some sense somewhat pessimistic because it outlines the reality that we're all ensconced in, let's say, and describes it as one that certainly has an element of tragedy. You know, life is difficult for people, and there's a lot of suffering in life, and it's often contaminated by malevolence because we can take a bad situation for us and our families and our communities and certainly do everything we can to make it worse. And so there's a dark element to life, and in order to be able to sustain yourself through that properly, you have to find something that's deeply meaningful. And you have an instinct for meaning. I mean, I think you can make a strong case for that neurologically. And the instinct for meaning helps you find a pathway through life that enables you to find engagement, a rich engagement that can help you thrive in the face of the difficulty of life. And so, and interestingly enough, and this is something that's really struck a chord with my online viewers, I would say, I think the right pathway to meaning is not through rights and certainly not through impulsive pleasure, but through responsibility.
Right.
Yeah, and so if you think about the people you admire, which is a good way to start thinking about meaning, you know, or even those rare moments when you actually might admire something you yourself have done, it's almost inevitably the case that that's associated with at least taking responsibility for yourself, right? Because no one admires anyone who can't take responsibility for themselves. But you find people increasingly admirable and worthy of imitating and as models for meaning if they can take responsibility for themselves and for their families and for their communities in a way that makes all three of those things work at the same time. And interestingly enough, that kind of provides an antidote. Not only does that rectify suffering itself because it makes you an effective actor in the world, but it's also an antidote to the trials and tribulations of life. Because, as Nietzsche said, the philosopher, if you have a why, you can bear any how.
I love that line. Let's just say that it's such a great line, and it's one of the ones that really stood out, and it so goes to the heart of your message. Let's just hear it again.
He who has a why can bear any how.
Really profound. And your book really shows people how to do exactly that, how to find that why. One of the things that that is a constant theme throughout the book is this concept of order versus chaos. And what's interesting to me is that, as I was saying, and as you mentioned just now, those who hear your message, so many find it a way that they can really change their lives. It's very different,
for the better.
Right? And it's really different from the normal stuff that gets talked about on TV and in politics. You're actually helping people in a direct way. Can you talk a little bit about how this message of take responsibility, find meaning, can help people in all different sort of stations in life, as it were, navigate the chaos and bring order?
Well, first of all, as I laid out in the first part of our discussion, it's necessary to come to terms with the fact that life has a dark element, right? That you're destined for suffering. You're destined to have floods in your life. You're destined to have things fall apart. And you're destined to make mistakes. And so you need to live in a manner that not only makes that acceptable, but that makes it an intelligible part of the game. And the way to do that is to take responsibility for the facts on the ground. Now, if you're taking care of yourself, well, you're a vulnerable person. You can be hurt. And you can do things improperly and badly. And if you're taking care of your family, it's the same thing. And if you're taking care of the community, it's the same thing. There are things in the world that are clearly out of balance that need to be set right. And some of those things are going to bother you and disturb you. And that being bothered by that and having it grate at your conscience or gnaw at your conscience is actually a sign, in some sense, from the deepest parts of your being, that you're being called forward into the world to act responsibly in relationship to those problems and to solve them. It's like you can make the world a less miserable place. You can make yourself a less miserable person and more competent person. You can do things to put your family together, and you can have a broader overarching concern for the family if you can get those first two things straight.
Right.
And it's see, so often in the last few decades, psychologists and other people who are well-meaning have told everyone, you're okay the way you are. You should feel good about yourself. It's like, I think that's a terrible message for young people, especially young people. It's not a great message for anybody, but it's especially bad for young people, because many young people are suffering from, say, a crisis of meaning and purpose. And if you tell them, well, you're okay the way you are, it's like there's no direction for them. What you tell young people is, look, you know, you're young and you're making mistakes and you don't know what you're doing exactly, but there's something to you, man. If you could tap into the potential that lies within you, let's say, if you could take on a noble attitude towards the world and work to rectify suffering and to constrain malevolence, God only knows what you could become. And more importantly than that, that's how our entire society views you. The reason that individual sovereignty inheres in you, why you have the rights of a citizen, and why you're regarded as a sovereign individual, is because our entire culture over thousands of years has actually decided, tens of thousands of years, has actually decided that there's something in you of ultimate value that the entire stability of the entire society depends on, that you could bring forward and nurture, and that the world would definitely be a lesser place without. That's way better than you're okay the way you are.
Right, I think people agree with that. But let's just get specific. So let's just put it in terms that relate a little bit more to our sort of daily political discussions. Let's say, you know, there's issues that people get concerned about, immigration and the economy and jobs and education. What does... I just want to make sure I'm getting this right. You're saying, well, those things are going to be problems. They're probably going to go bad as well as badly as well as go well. But never mind all that. Never mind what happens in Congress or with the presidency or whatever. You can take responsibility for your life right here today by doing what sorts of things?
Well, one of the things that's become somewhat of an internet meme, and people have made all sorts of jokes about this, is that I've suggested, sort of tongue-in-cheek, but not entirely, that people stop protesting and start by cleaning up their rooms. And you know, it's not something that's really any different than your mother probably told you endless dozens of times. But the thing is that, especially if you live in a disordered household, it's actually not that easy to put your room in order. First of all, you have to learn to do it. You have to think, well, what am I going to do with my closet? What sort of clothes should be in here? How am I going to present myself to the world? How am I going to be organized so that when I wake up in the morning, I feel like engaging in the day? How do I set up my room so that when I walk in, it's the sort of place that brings out the best in me? How do I put necessary order in this small area, which I have right in front of me? It's like, well, it's good practice to do that. And it's not because a good person keeps the room clean.
Yes.
It's not that. It's because you're setting the stage for the person that you want to be. And this has caught fire to some degree, this idea, because I'm taking this simple concept, which is, well, you should clean up your room, and saying, well, no, you don't exactly understand, is that you have a little bit of reality right here in front of you, and it's been granted to you, and you actually have some control over it.
This is what I think is really, I love that, because a lot of your critics, we'll get to some of them later, they describe your message as somewhat dark and
it isn't somewhat dark, it's very dark.
Right, okay, you acknowledge that. But actually, what you've just described there is hope. It's hopeful. It's like, okay, the world may be chaotic, but I can do something about my little bit of it.
And it'll make a difference. Well, and there's something
else. And that's
else.
a positive and hopeful thing. But I'm sorry to cut you. We've got a lot of time, and I just wanted to make sure that we had time for a question from our audience, from Chris, I think, who's just here, because I thought it was very relevant to what you were just saying about a lot of what you've been talking about is the individual, take responsibility, and so on. You had an interesting question, Chris, about about the individual versus society and the social order. What was your question?
Hello, Dr. Peterson. You recommend that we evolve to become individuals, but aren't we social animals, and don't we derive value from our status in a social context? And hasn't liberalism been the force that has been hyper-focusing on the individual?
Well, we're certainly social creatures. The question is, what level of analysis should be primary? And when I was discussing some of my ideas just moments ago, I made a case for accepting responsibility in an increasingly broad social context. It's like your first job is to get your act together. And that's because you have at least some control over yourself, and you can decide what sort of things you're doing wrong and what sort of things you can do better, and you can work on that. And then you have to do that in a way that's, well, partly of benefit also to your future self. And so the social world starts to creep in there, right? Because the person you're going to be in 5 years is in some sense another person that you have to take into account. So you have to put your life together. But you have to put your life together in a way that works now, and next week, and next month, and next year. And then you have to put it together in a way that's also of benefit to the people who you're intimately associated with. That might be your partner, but it's certainly also your family. And then if you get those things in alignment, in some sort of harmony, and harmony is a good way to think about it, then you can start thinking about how you can do all of that and simultaneously benefit your community. And so if you take full individual responsibility, and which I think is different than concentrating, let's say, on your individual rights, as you take more and more comprehensive individual responsibility, you naturally bring in the entire social world around you, and appropriately. And you should start in a limited domain, because, well, what do you know? You want to start with well, maybe you want to start with experimenting with things where you'd be directly responsible for the negative consequences, for example, if you're trying to change things. And you can practice in these smaller domains. Like with regards to your room. If you have your room in order, you could try making it beautiful. That's also extraordinarily difficult, and that'll produce a relationship between you and something transcendent like beauty. You can put yourself together, and in doing so, then you're going to be optimally positioned to be a proper social person. And that's obviously of crucial importance. The question is, what's the initial level of analysis, and where do you start? So